I want to get into a little bit the difference between addressing food insecurity in urban areas versus rural areas. I'm here in Washington County. We have a lot of rural communities. What are some of the difficulties that come with rural food insecurity?
So the Utah Food Bank is one of the few food banks in the country who has the responsibility of the entire state. So we look at it geographically, then we have to look at it logistically. Here in Salt Lake City, we can get to a pantry that needs additional help within an hour. For us to get to a rural community in the bottom part of the state, it takes a longer time frame to travel. And sometimes we have so many things that we can't control, weather being our biggest challenge. Construction, there's all sorts of things that happens when you have a trucking company that hits the road to go. So for us, we recognize service looks a little different in those counties that are not right here along the Wasatch Front.
This weekend is the Turkey Trot here in St. George, and I know that they are collecting donations for the Utah Food Bank. How are those donations distributed, and how do you make sure that that is done equitably across the county?
So we are always so excited to see organizations work on our behalf. For us to do what we have to do, we have to have partnership, we have to have collaboration, we have to have the ability to know that those around us are helping us in this fight against hunger. So when a group will host a food drive like this, that product is picked up. It'll be picked up in St. George. It'll go directly to the warehouse there in St. George. And then it will be entered into our inventory and distributed out to the 5 counties in that lower portion of the state. The majority of it, of course, is right in St. George, Washington area, because that's where the population is centered mostly. So I would say the majority of that food will stay right there. But it's the responsibility of that location to reach out to 5 counties in that southwest corner of our state.
Now, when it comes to identifying the areas of need, how do you determine that? Is it by population? Is there any sort of reporting on the levels of food insecurity in different areas? How do you kind of determine where things need to go?
So the Utah Food Bank is part of an affiliation with a group called Feeding America. Feeding America is the overarching umbrella, if you will, of 200 food banks across the country. We come together as a group and we learn from each other, we share from each other, and Feeding America has the ability to provide each of us, whether we're responsible for a state or a city or numerous counties, information that is pertinent to our population in the areas that we call our service area. So they use information from all sorts of reporting that they can bring together. Census reporting, for example. They give us the opportunity to have reports crafted for us based on population, based on income, based on poverty level. We're able to look at those as almost, we call it a map, that gives us then direction to see where we need to focus. It allows us to be sure that we're not overserving one area and underserving another. They give us guidelines to follow that make sure that our distributions are equitable. And it helps us really realize the types of problems that are coming from a situation that might apply to one county and not another. So we use a lot of external information, but it's prepared at a level that's applicable across the country.
There's been a lot of conversation nationally about rising food costs. How do you see that correlate with the levels of food insecurity in different communities? Is that a direct correlation?
It's so interesting as we watch food pricing and what happens around us. We all have some sort of a budget that we use in our homes, and we have things that we recognize that have to be paid. The rent, but affordable housing is a challenge. If you have children, you have daycare. That's an expense that's, skyrocketing. By the time they go through the list of things on a monthly budget, food usually falls to the bottom of that list. We're concerned now because the weather has changed. It's going to be cold. Does a family choose to pay a power bill or a gas bill and have heat in the home, or do they buy food? So families are continuing to have to decide, first of all, what items to address, and then they have to look at the money they have to spend. And as the cost of food has increased over the last few years dramatically, there are certain items that families just can't afford, or at least they can't afford them very often. From our perspective, we're an emergency food assistance, so we're not there to give them all of their food, but we're here to help them supplement. So perhaps if they're coming to a pantry and they're receiving product, money they would have spent on that product, they can then turn and use on other items they would buy in a grocery store. So we're trying to help them balance their diet. We're trying to help them stretch the food in the home between paycheck to paycheck. And we're trying to be able to give them a variety of things that their family would enjoy. There's a lot of dignity that has to be put in place for people. Just because you're struggling doesn't mean you have to be embarrassed, and it doesn't mean you shouldn't ask for help. There are a lot of resources out there that can help families. They just need to take that first step.
You mentioned seasonality, and I'm curious how, specifically here in St. George, when we have extremely hot summers and more mild winters, is there any difference between our weather here and that seasonal need versus places like up in Salt Lake, where we have really cold winters and you have that difficult weather, but you have a more mild summer?
We do see it's almost the opposite. It almost flips in southern Utah. We see that during the summer with our summer feeding programs for kids. They give us a certain temperature, and when the outside temperature hits that, we have to discontinue service because it's not healthy for people to be out in that kind of heat. So we do have things that we have to work around differently, and it is a summer time frame that we have to pay close attention to southern Utah. But the fact of the matter is, it shouldn't matter what season it is. Folks here in our state shouldn't be hungry. And we jokingly have a phrase here, hunger knows no season. So we really work diligently to be sure, regardless of the season, we're making an attempt to be sure that all the pantries are stocked. And the thing we do that we're very proud of is all of that food that goes through this system is free of charge. It's just delivered to the pantry. It's delivered then to the recipient. All of that is free of charge. There's no delivery fee. There's no membership fee for a pantry to be part of Utah Food Bank's group. And there certainly isn't a cost to the recipient who gets that product to help their family. So we're proud of the fact that we're just one of a handful of food banks left in the country that operate that way.
Now, when it comes to funding and donations, how much are you relying on the donations of people in communities with their extra food?
So, it's interesting. People always think that food drives and the food that they donate takes care of our inventory. And it's really, in reality, food drives is a very small part, but it's a very important part because the product that comes through a food drive is exactly the product you would have in your home. You are donating to us what your family enjoys. So consequently, another family can enjoy it as well. So the food drive is very important. The variety it gives families and allows us to share with families really is appreciated by families. And we enjoy having the ability to put together items from food drive products that complement what we have here in the warehouse. So we're hopeful that we give people items that they can then combine together to make a complete meal.
In your work over your time with the Utah Food Bank, what responses do you get or reactions from people who have benefited from the food bank? What is that tangible experience of working with people maybe in underserved populations?
I've been involved with the Utah Food Bank for 30 years. So I've had an opportunity to watch our audience change, to see our state grow, to see the need increase, and to see the Utah Food Bank be able to rally to meet that need. We're in a warehouse setting here. We see lots of cans and products and things around us. But it's when we go out to a pantry or out to a distribution, particularly the ones at the schools where you have children. And when a child comes up to you and looks at you and with a smile on his face and says to you, "I'm so glad you came here today because tonight we can have dinner." Those are the kinds of statements that make you recognize that we still have work to do. We're doing the best we can to be sure that all kids have that kind of a smile, but we can't quit now. Numbers and requests for food right now are higher than they've ever been. Numbers are higher than they were during COVID. So we know the need is continuing to increase. We have to be prepared with the help of folks that are listening to this interview to know that collectively coming together, we can continue to meet that need throughout the state of Utah.
Thank you so much. Is there anything you feel like we didn't cover that you want to add to this conversation?
You know, people always think of food that comes to us, but there are 3 items that a food bank needs to have to be complete, and that's food, time, or money. So if you were in a situation in your community, or if there is a pantry in your neighborhood, please feel free to volunteer time for them. Helping them for a couple of hours is just as important as it is to give food. If you have the ability to donate and give a monetary donation, those are incredible as well. You know, we have to keep the lights on and the heat going too. So for us to be able to have cash that comes to us that we are allowed to use for our operating expenses is incredible. But one thing the Utah Food Bank's really proud of is, you know, for every dollar that comes to us, 95 cents of that dollar goes into programs, 5 cents goes into our admin fees. So we stretch your dollar. We use that dollar with the utmost of transparency because we're humbled that you're trusting us with your money. But then we take that dollar and we turn that into about $70.80 worth of goods and services. Meaning for, you know, if you give us a $10 donation, the value at the food bank then becomes about $78. So while cash isn't as exciting, it certainly is as important, and we can stretch your dollar a different way than you can if you were to go to a grocery store. So, you know, we have to say thank you to volunteers that help us. We need to say thank you to people who recognize those monetary donations are in need. A special thank you to people who take time to put food together to make a donation of items for us. And when we combine that food, time, and money, we're able to fight hunger in Utah and do it successfully.